if you would hit it for me, kind sir, I'd
You
appreciate
are
it. There we are.
live.
Excellent. So welcome all. I want to talk about voice a bit tonight. We've talked a lot about it in monologue and scene work, and I realized as I was sort of going over some lecture stuff, we've done a little alternation over the last few weeks where we've hit some sort of professional career stuff, and then we've come back to some craft stuff, and I think the back and forth is nice. I don't as always, I don't proclaim to be an expert on the career stuff, but I do think I have some wisdom to sort of share. But in looking at the craft stuff and what I hadn't sort of directly addressed was sort of vocal attack, or what I call sort of vocal charge and verbal attack. Now, I want to keep these lectures short. I don't want to make this a voice class, so I'm going to touch on some technical vocal things, but I'm not going to go deep down the rabbit hole on them. I'm happy to answer some questions at the end. And if people are interested, I'm happy to do a longer lecture on sort of voice work. But I wanted to just touch on some of the basic necessaries in our craft when we're approaching plays of language and supporting that language in our work. And things that, for those of us that have had the lucky joy of getting voice and text classes, either independently or through schools, have been exposed to certain elements of this. But I think for a lot of actors these days, these are the kind of discussions in classes that are sort of falling out of style. So I thought I'd address some of it tonight. For those of you that have had a longer voice education, a lot of this might be a little repetitive, but I do think I have some sort of more direct things to share with performing Shakespeare. So vocal charge and verbal attack. So again, we're studying plays of language, and these are plays of heightened language, of verse, of poetry, and our instruments, our voices, and our bodies, but again, we're addressing the voice tonight, really have to be tuned to support that language. So at first, to address some sort of modern misconceptions, and a lot of this came in with method acting and Marlon Brando, who made it famous, as did James Dean. It's this sort of modern idea of mumbling or softer or going off voice and sort of this kind of thing. And this idea that it's more natural or it's realer. And first of all, it's not more natural. And secondly, a great deal of that kind of work is generally dialect or accent work, which tells you stories about emphasis and setting up certain words, and in terms of pitch glides, and these are technical things. And a genius like Brando, and I do think he was a genius, who sort of popularized this idea of mumbling as naturalism. He certainly didn't do that intentionally. That's what followed him. And I think it happened for two reasons. One thing to say is that if you look at him in Julius Caesar with Gielgud, and people have wildly different opinions about this film. I like it. I don't think it's a great film, but I like it. He is crystal fucking clear. There is none of this acting in that. And if you want a small side story about how hard Brando worked, he visited Gielgud's trailer every night and asked Gielgud to read him his lines. That's how Brando prepared to play Mark Antony, is essentially he got Gielgud to read him the work and he replicated it. Brando was ruthless, but Brando was not lazy. And the sort of mumble is naturalism, is realism thing that followed him was not his fault, and it's not what he intended. So first of all, I want to dispel of a modern misconception that strong voices, vocal support, clarity in language, that any of these things are unnatural. They're not. Again, everybody's different. When you're creating a character, when you're looking at a dialect, you're going to find various levels. You're going to make different choices. And sometimes people aren't quite as clear. And there are really people out there who really just sort of don't express as clearly. And those are choices you can make. Those are rarely choices you're going to make with a Shakespearean character, if ever. I think there's always exceptions to every rule, so I don't want to say you'll never do it. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find it. You can look at Michael Keaton's Dogberry, which I don't think is good, even though I have a personal place of love for that film in my heart. but that was sort of a mumble performance, and I don't think it served. I don't think it helped the play. But this sort of idea of lack of clarity equals realism, I think, caught fire for two reasons. One is laziness. This is the same reason that David Mamet's book caught fire. If you preach that not doing the work is the best way to do the work, then a lot of actors out there will breathe a sigh of relief and not do the work. It's bullshit. While Mamet is a man of the theater and has, if you read what he writes, it's not that it's all full of shit, but this idea that you can toss all this work out the window and just talk loud enough and you'll be good enough is just clearly not true. I mean, centuries have disproven him. But people like it because it gives them permission not to do the work. It says, look, you can be good enough without doing the work. And so Brando's mumbling is, and again, he didn't mumble. He had some famous performances where he mumbled. That's where it caught fire. I think the other one is insecurity. And I want to be careful about ever getting too personal in our work. I want this to be work on craft. But very often, when people are not on their voices, and I'll get to this, I'm going to talk about pace a little bit, but when people are rushing, I do think it is born of insecurity, of an attempt not to be truly heard, to get out of the way before somebody can actually form a judgment on you. I think that's both about if you're mumbling, if you're quiet and they can't quite catch you, or if you're moving so fast that they can't quite catch you. So laziness or insecurity, I think, are the modern reasons that we avoid vocal work. We have to be vocally strong to do this work. If you read these plays, if you watch the great performances, if you have some concept of the kind of work you want to do, if you look at the great actors and actresses, they are vocally mighty, and you need to work to be. That means staying on your breath or on your air. You'll hear people say that. What does that mean if you don't know? And there's no shame in not knowing. It means it's having your breath deep in your body. It's being supported by your diaphragm. So if I am on my breath right now. If I go off my breath, I'm talking right here. So the air is coming out sort of directly through my throat while I'm talking. I'm not on my breath. Now I could go into a more technical description of what that means. I don't want to take the time to do that, but you can hear the difference when I'm on or off my breath, right? And you will hear actors, and they don't even know they're doing it. They don't know they're doing it. No actor chooses to go off their breath, but you see this habit all the time. And most of us are guilty of falling into it at points, often bred of insecurity. So you want to stay on your breath. You want to be deeply supported. You want your breath. I had a great teacher that taught me to breathe essentially into my lower back. Now, your lungs don't go that far. Singers will often talk about singing from their ass, right? Obviously, your lungs, your breath doesn't literally go that far, but by envisioning it and by breathing deeply into yourself, you're getting under your diaphragm. You're getting your breath under and into you. So you want to support through your diaphragm. You want your breath deep in your body, and you don't want to be speaking through your throat or speaking off your air. So being off your breath is a means of hiding. Rarely are you aware of it, but that is what it means. Now, some people just have a sort of technical hitch. They've fallen into a bad habit. But I think it's usually born of an attempt not to be heard, which is ironic, of course, but we're complicated creatures. The other thing about this work is it manages your breath control, which is absolutely necessary for this kind of text, right? So I think I've told this, Olivier and, oh God, why am I doing this? His great partner at the RSC. Oh God, Olivier famously with his not Vivian Lee, she was his partner and his wife. Thank you, Alexander. But no, his Ralph Richardson, Olivier and Richardson. So by partner, I meant they ran the company together. And they would have competitions at the bar about who could get the most verse lines out on a single breath. And their breath control was mighty. And also they were both smokers. So it's like, this isn't about, I mean, obviously you want to do your best to be physically fit. I'm not judging anybody for their vices, but these guys poured their lives and physical preparation into this. And so when you're working long speeches, and you've seen me do this as we work monologues, there are times where we have to go, well, you ran out of breath. So this is craft. You have to breath mark your script. You have to say, okay, well, if I'm running out of breath, I have to line up where I can breathe. Now, we've had these discussions about line endings, and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on them tonight. I do think it's okay to breathe in a line. You can do it quickly. It's not that much of a nightmare. If you can find the breath on a line ending, that's great. I think structurally you'll often find it helpful to do so. But if you need to steal a breath midline, you can do it. There are artful ways of doing it without taking a pause to take a breath. But yes, you do have to sit down and map your script, map where you need to breathe if you're running out of breath. This is craft. This is pure craft. You have to, you often with this kind of work, you have to work like an athlete. They train every day, not because they're delivering the same performance every day, but they're preparing to reach the heights of what they are capable of. And so you are training your breath, and you're training your mind, and you're training your voice, and you're training your technique and your habit. I mean, it's what I'm hoping to offer you in this class consistently. It's a toolbox of things to continuously train and ready so that you can deliver the absolute best when you're called upon to deliver it. And so I also think that's why sports metaphors work themselves into the culture so much. It's that they often have to do with people attempting to operate at the highest of their capabilities. So this stuff, breath and voice, these are really unsexy things, right? These aren't art. These are craft. But this is the craft that makes art possible. And if you are not disciplined and well-trained in your vocal work and your breath work, you will not be disciplined. You will not be able to achieve the same levels in your artistic work. For example, and I brought this up a few times in work, when I'm talking to somebody about lists, these long lists where you have to vary each little thing. I can often offer a few things in class, but we usually don't have time to do the kind of work needed to knock it out of the park on a nice long list. And I'm going to look at some Octavius at the end here to give you an example, where the work is slowing down and making distinct and having a distinct point of view on each piece of the list. So it doesn't all blur out in the same thing. And you have to build that foundation, and then you have to slowly speed it up so that you've built your foundation underneath, and then you build it into performance speed. So an example of building the craft. The art isn't there until you get to the end, but if you don't build it, you can't get to the end. So what I mean when I say to be vocally charged is to be supported by your breath in both resonance and range. So that means you have enough, you're charged, you have enough breath under you to reach the heights of your voice, the tops of your builds, and to have access to all of your voice, to have access to your highest registers and to your lowest registers. Because the other thing that happens when you start running out of breath is that your range slowly folds together as you run out of breath. And I'm not taking a breath right now, so you're slowly going to hear it as I lose my range, and it comes down to this final point where that's all I have. So it's not just about literally having the breath to say what you need to say, although when you run out of breath, you need to mark it so that doesn't happen. It's also about knowing that you have enough breath under you to maintain your range and your resonance. And that that range is coloring. When we talk about coloring words and coloring phrases and giving point of view and voice to various pieces, you need your support. Without your support, it's not that you can't do anything to change it, but you don't have as wide a palette. And we're always talking about having as much of a palate as possible. And so this breath control is about maintaining your vocal charge. This is why, and now we're talking about line endings. Well, actually, now we're talking about momentum, and line endings are going to come up in a second. So if you're playing a Shakespearean lead, or a big part, doesn't matter, but let's just go with something like a Hamlet. You got, it's almost never uncut, but let's say it's uncut. You have about 2 hours and 45 minutes of stage time to support. The play's going to run about 3.5 hours uncut. You're on for about 2 hours and 45 minutes. So this vocal charge, this breath control, you need to maintain for 2 hours and 45 minutes. That's what I'm talking about when I say athletic. That's what I'm talking about when I say being prepared. So that's also about momentum. You cannot spare energy. You need to do everything you can to keep your vocal charge live. And so when we talk about not dropping off line endings, it's not just that we sort of might lose a word. It's that when a line ending drops off, I have to come back up. I have to fight harder to bring the vocal energy back up. So the reason not to drop off line endings, among a few other nitpicks, is to keep your vocal energy live. This is also about the tennis match with your fellow actors. This is about serving up vocal energy to your fellow actors. Because if you finish a line down, and then they have to sort of pick up the ball, they're being asked to do more work, and the momentum gets lost. This is both the vocal momentum on the stage for the audience's ear, but also your physical job in bringing the vocal momentum back up in a natural way. Again, you can always start shouting if you want, but that's rarely conducive. One of my mentors always called it leaving a hot stage. Leave a hot stage for your fellow actors. That's about exits and entrances. This is also part of the reason we talk about a lack of pauses in Shakespeare, which again, I'm not as militant about as some teachers you'll meet. But part of the reason for the lack of pauses is the lack of vocal drop, is the lack of vocal momentum. This is also why Shakespeare wrote his plays for there never to be a pause between scenes. There were no scene changes. So as the vocal energy walked off one side of the stage, the vocal energy came entering from the other side of the stage. He wrote his plays that way. Now, that doesn't mean that in modern theater we can't have some scene changes. We have access to some wonderful things. So there are times to take advantage of it. But in Shakespeare's theater, the exit line would finish, and maybe there'd be a beat, maybe. But the line of the next scene brought the energy of the next scene on. They left a hot stage for each other. So what I mean when I say verbal attack is about maintaining your vocal charge while driving forward into the text. Now, it's important to distinguish between pace and rushing. Rushing, as I mentioned earlier, is about hiding. It's about not exposing yourself. Pace is about keeping the vocal energy live, whether it's at a fast pace or whether it's at a slow pace, staying on your breath and making your points. But I'm not in this slower pace going to take any pauses. I'm just moving slower than if I'm talking at this sort of quicker pace. Now I can speed, I can do to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. I can do that. And it's it can be a parlor trick. But you're never going to perform that way. I'm not talking about speed. I'm not talking about rushing. When we talk about pace, we're talking about maintaining a vocal charge. So a verbal attack is maintaining that vocal charge while driving forward into the text. And whether you're moving fast or going slow, you have to, this is the endeavor to keep the thoughts with the words. So even if you're moving fast, you have to be able to think as fast as you're speaking. And if you're moving slow, you can't let your thought get ahead of you. Otherwise, we're going to end up in this weird sort of rolling pace, if that distinction makes sense. So the thought always has to stay with the word. Another director I work with called it being front-footed, leaning into the text, always moving forward with your vocal energy, not leaning back. Now, I'm still supported now, but I'm sort of leaning back as I talk to you. I'm sort of relaxing as I go through my vocal energy right now, instead of leaning forward as I continue to try to lecture or inform or elucidate or whatever word you'd like for it. And I will always bring up this dangerous little asterisk at the end that all rules can be broken. You might find a moment where going off breath is a choice. You might find a moment where speeding past the point of, or dangerously close to the point of comprehension might be telling a story. So you can break these rules, but by God, please break them out of choice and not out of ignorance. Know the structure within which the craft is best supported, and break the rules on occasion when you want to get creative, or if you're in a rehearsal and you just want to throw some paint at the wall and see what happens. Break the rules and explore, but know that those rules are in place most of the time to do you service. Every now and then breaking them can be a wonderful creative little beat, but just be careful. So I am going to throw a scene from Antony and Cleopatra. This is Act 3, Scene 6, into the chat. Go ahead and follow that link. Give it a look. We're looking about a little past halfway down the scene. I'm going to start with Octavius Caesar's "Why have you stolen upon us thus?" So in this scene, Antony has abandoned his promises. He has fled back to Cleopatra, and Octavia, Octavius's sister, has come to talk to his brother, who is furious at Antony's betrayal and personally furious at the fact that Antony has married Octavia and has now lied to her and abandoned her. So first his anger is targeted at Octavia. And then when he explains to her what Antony is doing, we have one of these wonderful sort of speeches of verbal acrobatics when we get to the names of all these empires and kings. So I'm going to start and then do a little skipping. And what I'm trying to do, this is a speech of anger and of drive. I need to maintain vocal charge to have the breath under me to do it. And I need to drive forward, especially in the second half of verbal acrobatics. Otherwise, it's meaningless because you don't know what these names are. The only joy in this is the verbal acrobatics. So "Why have you stolen upon us thus" is where I'm going to start. Then I'll do a little skipping as I talk through it until I get to "Know my most wronged sister," to try to elucidate a little bit of this vocal charge and verbal attack. So Octavia has arrived and says to her brother, "You have not called me so, nor have you cause." And Octavia says to his sister, "Why have you stolen upon us thus? You come not like Caesar's sister. The wife of Antony should have an army for an usher, and the neighs of horse to tell of her approach, long ere she did appear. The trees by the way should have borne men. The expectation fainted, longing for what it had not. Nay, the dust should have ascended to the roof of heaven, raised by your populous troops. But you are come a market maid to Rome, and have prevented the ostentation of our love, which, left unshown, is often left unloved. We should have met you by sea and land, supplying every stage with an augmented greeting." And she objects to this anger. "Good my lord, to come thus I was not constrained, but did of my free will. My lord Mark Antony, hearing of that you prepared for war, acquainted my grieved ear withal, whereon I begged his pardon to return." So Octavia tells of Antony's lie, to which Octavius says, "Which soon he granted, being an obstruct between his lust in him. Do not say so, my lord. I have eyes upon him, and his affairs come to me on the wind. Where is he now?" He challenges his sister. And Octavia says, "My lord, in Athens," which is not true. And Octavius says, "No, my most wronged sister, Cleopatra hath nodded him to her. He hath given his empire up to a whore, who now are levying the kings of the earth for war. He has assembled Bacchus, the king of Libya, Archelaus of Cappadocia, Philadelphos, king of Paphlagonia, the Thracian king, Adalis, King Malchus of Arabia, king of Pont, Herod of Jewry, Mithridates, king of Compagnie, Polemon and Amintus, the kings of Mede and Lycidonia, with a more larger list of scepters." So without your breath, You will never be able to do that. And so as far as naturalism or mumbling or any idea of laziness, I did this part in 2015. That was my favorite discovery of the show. It wasn't my favorite part of the show, but the discovery of that speech might have been my favorite part of the process. And I loved the technical work, but I couldn't do it if I hadn't worked my fucking tail off from a technical point of view. So that's what vocally charged and verbal attack means to me. And that's what again, I can do a longer lecture at some point on more specific vocal stuff, and we'll happily do so if people are interested. I also want to avoid things that are too rudimentary if most of this, you guys have studied it. So I'm open to feedback on that. But when we talk about voice and being on our air, being vocally charged, front-footed, leaning into text, this is a lot of what I'm talking about. So there it is. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer a few. If hands want to go up in the chat. I have one from Alexandra. Excellent. I'm asking you to unmute.
I feel like I always have a question.
I love that you always have a question.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken lots of voice classes, but I really struggle to project my voice. I have a very thin voice with a narrow range. Like if I go to a party, this is one of the reasons I don't really like going out where there's lots of people and it's loud. I will lose my voice by trying to talk over the music because I have to scream to get my voice into a register that people can hear. And I don't know that there's a way to fix that. But I find that when I use my body the way that, I'm told with your belly breath and all of that it's almost exhausting. Like it takes so much mental effort for me to do that I don't know if I'm doing it wrong. Is there a better way or a better way to train it? So I'm not always cutting off here and speaking from up here, as opposed to using my entire body, which feels almost like in order to get that kind of volume, it almost feels like my voice compresses into a smaller range, the way you say that losing your voice compresses into a smaller range.
Yeah. I actually, excuse me, I've made the mistake of not having any water by me tonight. I actually have three things to say. One, we met and worked together 2009-ish.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that in our work in this class, and I mean, I've seen you many times since then. We've had a lot of lovely conversations, but in our work in this class, I don't know what work or you have done in the space between, and maybe Zoom has something to do with it, but I hear you more supported and more vocally charged than I remember you being back then. And I don't know if that's work you've done or it's the medium or maybe it's just time passing. But when the minute we started working together, and this is sort of a personal comment on your question, one of the first things I thought was Alexandra's really on her voice. I mean, she's really under herself right now. The second thing to say is there is no solution to having to shout at a party. And I know that was just an example for you, but what I mean is, if you find yourself clenching, the trick is to recognize that you're in your throat. And if you do, it's not about throwing yourself deep into your body. I mean, it does take a lot of work. You should be working your body and your breath whenever you do warm-ups, whenever you're specifically focused on doing that. You'll exhaust yourself if you try to walk around with that prepared. The point is just to register that you're clenching your voice. Take a breath, breathe deep into your diaphragm, and just try to release the throat. Don't try to project so loud. Don't try to live in this. Try to release the bad habit. Don't try to live in the good habit. The good habit will be built slowly over time as you give it a specific amount of time each day or with each rehearsal or with each process. But no, it'll exhaust you physically and mentally to try to walk around remembering it. The better key is to recognize when you're hitting a bad habit and just remind your body to release it. Remind your body not to go there. And the third point I'll make is, you know, a mentor, well, without going down the full story, if your if your intention is absolutely clear, if you're sending an intention to somebody, whether you're acting on stage or whether you're having a conversation at a party, you are clearer and louder than you think. I mean, if you're at a party so loud that people just can't hear you, just excuse yourself. I mean, that was for our late teens and 20s, and we've slowly passed that time. There's no reason to put ourselves through it again.
Decades ago.
Yeah. But often sending intention directly to somebody will make you louder, it will make you clearer. And also a reminder that whether or not they're truly listening to you also has a lot to do with it. And sometimes at a loud sort of raucous party, nobody's actually listening to anybody. Unless
it was really more of an example of how I can easily
no,
lose
I get it.
by trying to project by getting in here, as opposed to being down here, centered, supported, and trying to open up. But that takes so much mental and physical energy.
Yeah, don't try to do both. Catch the habit, step back from it, try to take one breath, try to just release the habit and get some breath under you, and stop doing it. It's more about self-correction than trying to walk around with your breath under you. You'll drive yourself crazy. So yeah, those are maybe some small helps, but I would just encourage you not to try to do it, not to try to walk around sort of breathing perfectly. Yeah, just build the habit. Don't try to self-fix it in a moment's notice. I hope that sort of answers the question.
No, it does. Thank you. And it was good to watch you do it, where you were like not yelling, but like really getting impassioned in that speech, because you could see and hear how the breath and the supported nature of the breath in that speech was so necessary, if that makes sense.
Good. That was my hope. I'm really glad that came through. Thank you, Alexandra.
Absolutely. Thank you.
My pleasure. Oh, you get it. Any other questions? All right. Great.